Number 4. Scary True Craigslist Stories. A story 1, The Babysitter. My name is Amber. I was 23 years old, studying early childhood education at the University of Cincinnati in Ohio, and picking up babysitting jobs on the side to cover my grocery bills and whatever was left of my rent after financial aid. I had been babysitting since I was 15. I had done it through word of mouth, through apps, through church bulletin boards, and yes, through Craigslist. The listing I answered on a Thursday afternoon in March seemed like every other listing I had ever answered. Family seeking experienced babysitter 2 children, ages 4 and 6, Friday evenings, $20 an hour, non-smoking household references welcome. The man who posted it said his name was Paul. He said his wife worked Friday nights and he traveled for work, and they needed reliable help starting immediately. I responded, we exchanged messages, he gave me an address in Norwood, and I showed up at 6:30 p.m. on a Friday with my tote bag and my phone fully charged. If you are watching this channel for the first time, subscribe right now and tell me in the comments what state you're listening from. Because what I found when I got to that house had nothing to do with babysitting, and I want you to hear every detail of how I got out. I want to explain what a normal babysitting inquiry looks like, so you understand exactly where this one started to deviate. A normal parent contacts you, and the first questions are about your experience, your references, whether you know CPR, your availability. They want to know about you. Paul's first message asked none of those things. His first message asked how quickly I could start, and whether I drove my own car, and whether I typically stayed the full duration of a job or left early if the kids fell asleep. 3 questions, all of them oriented around my schedule, my transportation, and my patterns. I noticed it and then reframed it as an eager parent in a difficult childcare situation and kept responding. The house in Norwood was on a block of older 2-story homes close together with narrow driveways. I parked on the street and walked up to the front door and rang the bell at 6:28. Paul answered. He was around 40, slim, with a pleasant and unhurried manner. He thanked me for coming and invited me in and offered me a glass of water. The living room was tidy. There was a sectional sofa and a television and a low coffee table with a few children's books stacked on it. The books looked new, the kind of new that comes from a store that day rather than from being read repeatedly by actual children. I asked where the kids were. Paul said they were upstairs getting ready for bed and that they were a little shy with new people and might take some time to warm up. He asked me to sit down and went over the house rules. No television past 8, snacks in the pantry, his cell number on the whiteboard in the kitchen. He spoke for about 5 minutes, and during those 5 minutes he did not once mention either child by name. I asked him to tell me a little about each of them. He paused for just a fraction of a second and then said the older one was Emma and the younger one was Jake, and that Emma liked drawing and Jake was really into dinosaurs right now. He delivered those details the way someone delivers information they have just assembled rather than information they carry around naturally. Parents talk about their children the way people talk about themselves. It comes from somewhere automatic. Paul was talking about Emma and Jake from somewhere deliberate. I said I would love to go up and meet them before he left. He said they were probably already in bed, and it might upset their routine to have a stranger come in before they were settled. I said I understood completely, and that I would just pop my head in the doorway and introduce myself quickly so they knew who was in the house. I stood up as I said it, committing to the movement rather than asking permission for it. Paul stood up at the same time and positioned himself between me and the staircase. He said it really was better to let them sleep, and that I would meet them when they woke up. His voice was still pleasant. His body was not. I looked at him standing between me and the stairs, and I looked at the children's books on the coffee table, and I thought about the 3 questions in the first message and the names that came a half second too late, and I said I had forgotten something in my car and would be right back. I walked to the front door. He followed me to the door. I opened it and stepped onto the porch, and he stopped at the threshold and stood there watching me walk to my car. I got in, locked the doors, and called 911 from the driveway. I told them the address and that I believed I had been lured to the house under false pretenses and that I did not believe there were children on the premises. I told them the man was standing in the doorway watching my car. 2 units arrived in 4 minutes. Officers went to the door. Paul answered. They asked to do a walkthrough to confirm the welfare of the children. Paul said the children were sleeping, and he did not want them disturbed. Officers noted the legal threshold and called for a supervisor. While they waited, I showed the responding officer the original Craigslist listing on my phone. He recognized the phone number associated with the account from a prior report. The same number had been used to contact 2 other women in the Hamilton County area in the previous 6 weeks through different types of service listings. A house cleaner, a private tutor. Both had reported feeling uncomfortable during the initial visit and had left. Neither had called the police. Investigators subsequently confirmed there were no children living at or associated with that address. Paul was not the homeowner. The house was a rental unit he had occupied for 11 weeks. His background included a prior charge in a neighboring state, for which he had served a reduced sentence. He was taken into custody that evening on charges related to the ongoing investigation connecting him to the prior contacts. Full case outcome is part of Hamilton County public record. I drove home and called my roommate and could not fully explain what had happened until we had been on the phone for 20 minutes. The children's books on the coffee table were what stayed with me. Someone had bought children's books and put them on a table to make a room look like a place where children lived. That level of preparation is not impulsive. That is calculated over time. And I had walked right into the middle of it at 6:28 on a Friday evening with my tote bag and my fully charged phone and 8 years of babysitting experience that had never once prepared me for a house with no children in it. I still babysit. I work exclusively through a verified platform now with background checked families and GPS tracked sessions. Before any first visit, I send the family's name, address, and phone number to 2 separate contacts, and I check in by text when I arrive and when I leave. That is the protocol now. It is not negotiable, and it never will be. Story 2, The Garage Sale. My name is Luis. I was 30 years old living in Tucson, Arizona, and in the habit of hitting Craigslist garage sale listings on Saturday mornings, the way some people hit the farmer's market. It was a hobby, and occasionally a minor income source when I found things worth reselling. I had been doing it for 3 years and had been to hundreds of sales across the metro area. I knew the etiquette, I knew how to spot a good listing from a bad one, and I trusted my instincts about which sales were worth the drive. The listing I found on a Friday night in September said, moving sale, everything must go, tools, furniture, electronics, small appliances starting at 7 a.m. The address was in the Catalina foothills, the elevated residential area north of the city, where the houses sit back from the road behind tall walls and desert landscaping. I showed up at 7:05 and became the only person at that sale for an hour and a half. By the time I understood why, I was in my car at the end of the driveway calling the Pima County Sheriff. Stay with me and drop a comment telling me if you have ever felt like you were the only one who showed up somewhere you were not actually supposed to be. Garage sales in desirable neighborhoods draw early crowds. Serious buyers arrive before the posted time and wait at the curb. By 7 a.m. at a foothill sale advertising tools and electronics, you would typically see 6 to 10 cars along the street and a cluster of people moving through tables of merchandise. I pulled up at 7:05 and the street was empty. No other cars except a single pickup truck in the driveway, backed in with the tailgate down. I took that as a sign I had arrived before the crowd and grabbed the opportunity. I walked up the driveway toward the garage, which had its door raised halfway. A man came out from inside. He introduced himself as Warren. Late 50s, weathered with the kind of handshake that communicates something about control. He said he was glad I came early, and that there was a lot to go through. The garage was full. Tools along one wall organized and clean. A riding mower. Power tools still in their cases. 2 flat-screen televisions, relatively recent models. A generator. A pressure washer. A chest freezer. The inventory of a well-maintained household over 30 years of accumulation. All of it priced with small stickers that Warren said he had stayed up late putting on. I moved through the space and priced items and made a mental list. The tools were quality. The electronics were reasonably marked. I asked Warren how long he had lived in the house, and he said 12 years. I asked if the family was moving out of state, and he said yes. Heading to Colorado, needed to clear everything before the end of the month. Then I asked a question I always ask at sales this size because it tells me whether negotiating in bulk is worth attempting. I asked if he was the only one managing the sale, or if his wife would be around too. Warren looked at me for a moment, and then he said she was inside resting. He said it quickly and went back to adjusting price stickers on a shelf of hand tools. I kept browsing. 20 minutes later, a car slowed in front of the property, seemed to hesitate, and then drove on without stopping. Then another car did the same thing. I watched both from inside the garage without making it obvious I was watching. A third car slowed, and the driver rolled down the window and looked at the address marker on the wall, and then drove away. 3 cars in 20 minutes, all slowing at the correct address and then not stopping. I pulled out my phone and opened Craigslist and found the listing I had come from. I looked at the address in the listing, then I looked at the address on the wall of the house at the end of the driveway. They were different. The listing address was 4 houses down the block. I was at the wrong house. I was at a house that had no garage sale listing and no moving sale and no posted signs on the street. And Warren had been showing me around it for 30 minutes and had never once mentioned that I appeared to have come to the wrong place. I said I thought I might have the wrong address and held up my phone to show him the listing. Warren looked at the screen. He said nothing for a 3 count. Then he said it was probably just a typo in the listing and that I was already here, so I might as well take a look at what he had. A man showing an unlisted stranger around his property at 7 in the morning, who, when confronted with evidence that the stranger had arrived by mistake, invites him to stay anyway. I said I was going to check the listing address down the street and would come back if it turned out to be nothing. I walked to my car. I drove to the end of the driveway, stopped and called Pima County Sheriff non-emergency. I told him about the address discrepancy and about Warren's response when I showed him the listing. I told him about the wife he said was inside resting, and about the truck backed into the driveway with the tailgate down, which I had not registered consciously at the time, but which assembled into a particular picture now that I was sitting at the end of the driveway, thinking carefully about everything I had seen. Deputies arrived and made contact with Warren. The wife was inside. She was unharmed and cooperative with officers. She confirmed the garage sale was legitimate, and that the address in the listing had been typed incorrectly when she posted it the night before. She confirmed Warren was her husband of 19 years. Everything Warren had told me was true. It was a legitimate moving sale at a transposed address, and I had stumbled into it and then frightened myself out of it based on a sequence of coincidences. I have told this story several times, and people always ask if I was embarrassed. The answer is no. I made a phone call based on what I observed, and I would make the same call again on the same information. The alternative to making that call when you are wrong is not making it when you are right. I know which outcome I can live with. I went back to the actual listing address down the street. I bought a socket set for $12. It was a good morning. Story 3, the music lessons. My name is Sophie. I was 25 years old, living in Nashville, Tennessee, teaching private piano lessons out of my apartment while finishing a music performance graduate degree at Belmont University. I supplemented my lesson income by responding to Craigslist listings from families looking for private music teachers, which in Nashville is a reliable and relatively safe market, given the density of working musicians and music educators in the city. I had taken 6 students this way over 2 years without any issue. The 7th listing I responded to was from a man named Richard, who said he was looking for piano lessons for his 12-year-old daughter. We exchanged emails. He seemed informed and engaged, and we agreed to a trial lesson at his home in Brentwood on a Saturday afternoon. I arrived at 2 p.m., knocked on the front door, and the first thing I noticed was that there was no piano anywhere in the house. Comment right now and tell me what your instincts told you the last time something felt off before you could explain it. And keep listening, because Richard had been planning this long before I responded to that listing. Brentwood is an affluent suburb south of Nashville. Large homes, manicured properties, the kind of neighborhood where a private piano lesson in a well-appointed living room is the most ordinary thing imaginable. Richard's house matched the surroundings. 2-story colonial wide front porch, a late model SUV in the driveway, a basketball hoop at the edge of the yard, with the net still in good condition. All of it communicating the presence of an active family household. Richard answered the door. He was around 50, well-dressed for a Saturday afternoon, in a way that was slightly more deliberate than casual, and he shook my hand and thanked me for making the drive from Nashville. He led me into the living room and gestured toward a seating area and offered me something to drink. I looked around the living room while I declined the drink politely. Large sofa, tasteful artwork, a bookshelf with a consistent and curated collection, a fireplace with framed photographs on the mantel. I looked at the photographs, a man who appeared to be Richard, a woman who I assumed was his wife, and 2 children in various ages and settings. The photographs had the continuity of a real family's documentation of real time passing together, but there was no piano. Not in the living room, not visible through the doorway to the adjoining dining room, not audible as any kind of keyboard sound from elsewhere in the house. I asked Richard where the instrument was, and he said it was being tuned and would be returned next week, that he had arranged the trial lesson knowing the piano was out of the house because he wanted to meet me and discuss the curriculum before committing. That answer was almost right. Parents who are serious about music education do sometimes want to vet a teacher before investing in lessons, but you do not schedule a piano teacher for a Saturday afternoon and then discuss curriculum in an empty living room without any instrument present. You send an email for that conversation. You do not drive someone to your house. I asked to meet his daughter. Richard said she was at a friend's house and would be back later. I said I would love to reschedule for a time when she was home, so I could get a sense of her current level before we talked about curriculum. I said it while standing up. He said there was no rush and that she would probably be back in an hour, and asked if I could wait. I said I had another commitment and gathered my bag and walked to the front door. Richard followed me and stood in the doorway as I went to my car. I got in and drove to the end of the block and pulled over. I called a colleague of mine, another private teacher who had been in Nashville's music education community for 12 years, and who I knew had heard most of the warning stories the circuit generated. I described the listing, the house, the absent instrument, the absent daughter, the invitation to wait. She was quiet for a moment, and then told me she had received an email from a Richard matching my description 3 months prior from a Craigslist listing, and had declined after the second exchange, when his questions shifted from the daughter's musical background to questions about whether she taught alone and whether she brought an assistant to first sessions. I called Nashville Metro Police non-emergency and gave them Richard's address and the full account of both contacts. The listing was still active at the time of my call. The officer I spoke with asked for the email address associated with the listing and told me the information would be forwarded to the appropriate unit. The listing came down within 48 hours. I do not have further information about what investigation, if any, resulted. What I know is that Richard's first email to my colleague and his first email to me were nearly identical in structure and wording, which means the approach had been written and refined rather than composed fresh for each contact. I still teach private lessons. I teach exclusively in my own apartment at verified studio spaces affiliated with Belmont, or at the student's home only after a video call with both the parent and the child together, and after sharing the address with 2 contacts before departure. I have never gone to a first lesson at an unknown private residence since that Saturday afternoon in Brentwood. The photographs on the mantel looked completely real. The basketball hoop in the yard had a worn net that spoke of actual use. The books on the shelf were not decorative. Richard had built a space that communicated family and normalcy with considerable attention to detail. But there was no piano, and there was no daughter. And when I asked for both of them, he had an answer for each that was almost right and not quite right in the specific way of answers that have been prepared rather than lived. Chuck a Story 4. The Dog Walker. My name is Chris. I was 26 years old, living in Seattle, Washington, between jobs after a tech layoff and picking up gig work wherever I could find it while I sent out applications. Dog walking was something I had done informally for neighbors before and enjoyed, so when I saw a Craigslist listing for an experienced dog walker needed 2 dogs, daily walks, $15 per walk, I responded without hesitation. The woman who posted it said her name was Karen. She said she lived in the Fremont neighborhood and that her 2 golden retrievers needed an hour of exercise every afternoon while she worked from home. We texted back and forth. She seemed normal, and she gave me an address for a meet and greet on a Wednesday at 1 p.m. I showed up, knocked on the door of a tidy craftsman house, and a woman who was not Karen answered and told me she had never posted any dog walking listing and did not own any dogs. Hit subscribe if you are new here. And stay with me because Karen was not trying to hire a dog walker. She was trying to get a stranger to show up alone at a house that was not hers at 1 in the afternoon. Seattle's Fremont neighborhood is dense and walkable, full of small craftsman and bungalow homes on narrow lots with shared driveways and low fences between yards. It is a neighborhood where foot traffic is normal, and a stranger walking 2 golden retrievers down the sidewalk would not attract a second glance from anyone. That invisibility, I would later understand, was part of what Karen was looking for. The address Karen had given me was for a house on a residential block 3 streets from the main Fremont commercial strip. I parked and walked up and knocked at 1 p.m. exactly. The woman who answered was around 60, wearing a cardigan with the expression of someone interrupted in the middle of a quiet afternoon. She looked at me and waited. I said I was there about the dog walking position, that Karen had given me this address for a meet and greet at 1 o'clock. The woman said her name was not Karen, and she had not posted any listing, and she did not have dogs. She said it without irritation, just a flat clarity of someone stating an obvious fact. I apologized and showed her the listing on my phone. She looked at it, and her expression shifted into something more concerned. She said that was her address, her correct and complete address. Someone had posted a listing using her home address without her knowledge. I stepped back from the porch and looked at the street. I had texted Karen from the curb when I arrived to say I was outside. Karen had replied immediately with a thumbs up emoji. Whoever Karen was, she knew I was standing in front of this house right now. I looked at the neighboring properties. A car parked across the street that I had not given any attention to when I arrived had a single occupant in the driver's seat. I could not see clearly from where I was standing, but the posture was alert and forward-facing. Watching the house, I went back to my car. The car across the street did not move, but the driver's posture shifted slightly as I walked toward the curb. I got in and drove around the block and came back along the parallel street and positioned myself where I could see the car without being directly behind it. It pulled away from the curb 2 minutes later and drove north toward the commercial strip. I called Seattle Police non-emergency and reported the full sequence. The real address, the listing using someone else's property without consent, the car across the street, and the timing of Karen's response when I texted that I had arrived. The officer who took my information said the use of a legitimate residential address in a fraudulent listing was consistent with a surveillance method where the address served as an anchor point to draw specific types of individuals. In this case, someone presenting as young, mobile, and working alone to a location at a specific time so they could be observed and assessed without direct contact. Karen's phone number was a disposable number that disconnected within hours of my police call. The listing was taken down the same evening. The woman who owned the house was contacted by the department and advised to vary her routine for the following weeks and to report any unfamiliar vehicles on the block. She called me 3 days later, having gotten my number from the officer. She said she wanted to thank me for knocking on her door instead of just leaving when no one who matched the listing answered. She said she had not known until the officer called her that her address had been used, and that the knowledge of it had unsettled her considerably. I thanked her for answering the door and being honest about it. A lot of people would have said they did not know what I was talking about and closed the door and forgotten about it. She had taken it seriously, and that seriousness had completed the information chain that made the police report meaningful. I do dog walking now through a verified app with GPS track sessions and client identity confirmation before any first visit. Every first meeting happens in a public location, a coffee shop, a park, a visible place with people around. I do not go to a private address for any first contact with any new client under any circumstances. Karen never existed. The dogs never existed. The address was real, and the woman inside it was real and alone. And someone wanted to watch a young man show up to her front door to see if the situation was worth developing further. That is the entire purpose the listing served. That is all it was ever for. I think about the thumbs up emoji she sent me when I texted that I was outside. The immediacy of it. She was watching, and she knew exactly where I was, and she responded in real time to confirm I was in position. Someone sitting in a car on a residential street in Seattle at 1 p.m. on a Wednesday watching a stranger knock on a door, evaluating what they saw. I was the thing she was evaluating. I drove away before she finished. I think about what she was looking for often, and I'm glad I never found out what it was.